You've arrived at that spot in your illustration journey where you want to add some oomph to your work, right? That's where we come in with our fancy filters and our fancy layer styles in order to make our lives a little easier, but also play around with the power of Photoshop. So I just did this sort of quick, really flat coloring of an illustration that I thought would be really great for showing off effects like the holographic thing that I did for the boots on the clothing video, the warp effect, the lens blur effect, play around with some of the layer styles, and maybe we'll see where else I'll do. Depends on what else I remember. So first things first, I thought we should go over just how I did the holographic effect, right? So this shirt right here, I did in just value shading and tried to get as clean or as many different variations of the shade. And so then I'm going to duplicate this layer, go to image, adjustments, and we're going to isolate the darks. So let's see. No, not this way. This way. We're going to do it so we barely only see the darks. Something like that. And then we're going to go to image, add ourselves a gradient map. And I took this gradient map from Cynic's Designs, I think. And he did this gradient map where, oh, I don't think this is the one. I think it's this one, invert. And then we're going to move our values over. And so basically he chose like a rainbow color, but then like relatively varies, right? You can always change up whatever colors you want, but basically what you're going to do is like everywhere else besides that value range, right, is going to be black. And you can just make some fine adjustments. I took his magenta, I adjusted it to be a little more like warm purple rather than a cool purple. Have this pinkish color. Maybe I'll make this pinkish color this value slightly pinker so it'll match some of this. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. And then we're going to do screen, lighten. We're going to do screen. So then all the dark values are going to disappear, leaving only the color parts. And then you can go back here. We're going to adjust it a little bit, change, say, the hue and saturation. Just change it slightly. Maybe I'll lower the saturation a little bit, up the brightness a little bit. And then when I put it into screen mode, it's going to create some of that. And then next thing we're going to do, hide that layer. We're going to duplicate the base layer again. Mess around with the layer, the levels. So this time, we're going to do it so only the light parts are really visible. Something like that. It usually works better for holographic effect if you have a darker initial value. So let me try just lowering the overall brightness of this piece, this baby, and then up the contrast. There we go. That should help a little bit. And now we're going to try to bring out mostly only the lights. Okay, and then image, we're gonna again go back to our gradient map. And this time we're gonna do the inverse. Everywhere else is going to be white. Looks like there's a lot of pinks in there, so I'm gonna move everything over just a tad bit so we have a little bit more equal sharing, right? We're gonna change this color to say that. Okay. And then now we're gonna adjust it again, mess around with the colors and saturation. This time we're gonna do oops, didn't like how that looked, so we're gonna get rid of it. Duplicate that base layer. Try again this time. Again, we're gonna mess around with the levels. And so this process is just messing around with the levels till it gets to some interesting silhouettes, right? I'm gonna delete that value because I have a lot of whites. So what I'm trying to do is to get color into those light areas, but maybe we'll focus on getting into the dark areas anyway. So let's just heighten that dark. Something like that. And then we're gonna go in with our gradient map. All right, so that's how I got the color into the dark areas, and now I'm going to do darken. I'm also gonna mess around with saturation. In curves, I don't really understand it too much, but I usually just mess around with, like, say, if I want it a little more red, I'll like push it around and see how it looks. If I do hard light, maybe I'll reduce the transparency. Or maybe I'll do soft light. And then erase away parts where I don't like as much. Kind of a cool effect. Maybe I'll keep it. Do this again because I want to get just a bit more of that light area. So just trying one more time to try to get like the light areas have some more color in it. So I'm going to adjust everything. Let's try to up the contrast. Maybe that will help get that. I'm just gonna erase away some parts if I want like the color to show through. And then I might come back in, do one more layer, try to get like that dark, 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 right? And then adjustments, levels. Pump that dark up. And in those areas, we're going to try to get a little bit of a purple blue kind of color. Gradient map once more. Push those that way. Right, and then we're gonna do and erase away those parts that we don't want. I'm gonna try again. I didn't get that really dark in there. Yeah, didn't like that idea. Okay, we'll just go manually in there. Go on top. Take that color, make it just a tad darker, more saturated. Right, like you see the really clear cut lines. Those happen when you have like a really clear value shift, which obviously I made a wrong choice with this type of lighting source where it's like way too bright, because originally when I did this one I had a very dark to light kind of thing. So maybe if I try doing regardless, this is what we have, and we're just doing like final adjustments to it, painting on top of it, over it, etc. Alright, and there you have it. That's like a holographic kind of shirt, right? Pretty cool effect. Keep in mind, it'll look a little better if you have more clear, distinct values, like say, if you say you did this, then you do this value. Real distinct ones, right? You know what? It's fine. You get the idea. Just basically start out with like a black and white version and try to make sure like the values are relatively distinct. You don't have too many blurry lines. That way you'll get that really distinct holographic look, and then you duplicate those layers, mess around with it in the levels adjustment, in gradient mapping, in saturation, etc., and then you play around with like the different layer styles until you get to this sort of effect, and you just erase and like fix over and paint over, that kind of stuff, till you get what you want to see. And you can apply like this type of gradient layer to like say metal colors or like more rainbow colors that I saw on Cynic's designs. But if you want to know like someone who does it really great, go check him out. But I'm gonna stop there, and then I'm going to move on to say talking about how some of these layers work. I briefly mentioned it in the Photoshop's basics video, but I'm just gonna show it in action in this piece. So first up, we have the multiply layer, which is like a super duper handy tool that I like to use when I'm too lazy to mix colors, or I want to do a real fast job and get this really flat kind of desired kind of look, right? So when I apply multiply, what it basically does is it takes the top color and darkens, you know, the bottom color like this. I chose this really light blue, but I put it on top of this and put multiply, so it basically creates this nice shadow color. Right, and then it saves you the effort of having to figure out what does blue plus peach make. But obviously be careful with this. Don't use it too sparingly, because it means that you're going to neglect your color mixing skills, and like there's something about actually mixing the colors yourself that makes it a lot more fun when you're painting, in my opinion. And so that's why I don't typically use this as often unless I'm doing like trying to do like really quick work. Because the thing is, when you're mixing layers, you don't know what color the ensuing color is. So like if you wanted to transition from here to here using like a red pinkish, what color would you use? Like you can't really get brighter, you can only get darker, right, with these. Like say I want to get like a red, it's just going to create this darker red, but you're never going to get like this bright pink, just because multiply layer is not going to let you do that. And so what happens if I put this in, say, darken mode? Well, it's going to take that base color and darken it. And so compared to multiply, you don't mix the colors as much. You just darken the original shade that you used on the color itself. Color burn does weird things like this, right? It takes this color and mixes it into this base color and then amplifies the saturation, I think. And I don't typically use it just because it creates like these really ugly, real blown out saturated effects, which isn't my vibe, but to each their own. Maybe it'll work for, say, a specific piece that you want to do. If you do linear burn, same concept, it's going to darken it just in a different way. It's more earthy in this sense. Right, I'm gonna take this. Right, it created this kind of weird green. If I do a darker color, that means that any dark color that shows up, like this color, is going to disappear. Right, so only light colors are going to show up. If we do a dark color, is not going to like it. See? This super light color is going to disappear, whereas if you do a darker color, it's going to show up. What's my brush on? Such a weird thing. And this can help you like control whether or not, if you have like a addition layer on top where you have a dark spot and then a light spot, and then only the dark spot is actually going to show up, right? Lighten does the opposite effect, where it's going to lighten everything that you paint using this color. So if I use this, it's going to lighten according to this kind of value and this kind of color. Screen is just going to, if you have a dark color, it's not going to show up. And so it's like the opposite of darken, darker color. Color dodge just kind of explodes the color, so it becomes like really bright. Only in the mid-range are you going to actually see hues, whereas if you push it all the way up here, it's going to just become white at that point. Linear dodge is similar idea. You're only going to see the values in the mid-range. And so these layers might be great for, like, say, doing highlights or like real sharp rim lights. So like, say you want to do like a nice rim light. You might do it like this. Lighter color will just make everything else that's not a lighter color show up, right? See, this dark color is not showing up, but this lighter color is going to show up. So it's really fit for, like, if it's the opposite of screen, if you have a dark object and a light object, that light object's going to show up and not the dark object. Overlay mixes the color and creates these kind of blown out effects, and I have mentioned I am a huge fan of overlay because it creates these beautiful lighting effects like this, creates that beautiful kind of sunlight effect, and can help you create real quick lighting situations, like say this is a window. Right, helps you get that lighting effect real quick in there. Similar idea with soft light, except it's going to do it at a less intensity. Hard light is going to create a very strong kind of solid color, less mixing happening. Vivid light is, it blows it out, creates this super, usually typically leaning more to the yellow side. Linear light, again, blows it out, ups the saturation, ups it to the yellow area. Pin light, you see it's like super, super light. Really only likes when you shift over to like the cooler sections. Hard mix does these weird things with it we don't typically use. Difference, it's taking the opposite of the colors that it's mixing, I believe. Exclusion, weird stuff. Subtraction, it basically takes out this whole portion, like instead of making it a light source, it's gonna make it a shadow. Divide could be an interesting kind of color mix, creates these kind of neon effects, right? This could be like a city light instead. Hue, it's just based on the color that you put down. And then saturation is based on how saturated that color is. So this part is, this color that we put down was a lot more saturated on this skin than say on the hair. The hair is relatively equal saturation, so it's basically sinks in. Color, again, is just the color that we put down. And then luminosity is based on how light after you mix those colors together is going to become. And so let's show you the lens blur and the warp effect, because I honestly love how the warp effects looks like. So I'm just going to put something down in the background so you can actually see what's going on. Delete. If you go to the blur gallery and you do radial blur, this is where you're gonna get real cool effect. You can do spin, which will spin everything in the background like this. You can do zoom instead, which is going to do this. Zoom everything in the middle or relative middle. With motion blur, I love using it, especially when I've got hair strands like this. And I want to make it seem like it's moving away. Right? But you gotta make sure it's in the direction that the hair would be moving. And don't go too overboard with it, right? Just a little bit. Those I typically like to use. Shape blur is interesting because it tries to do a blur in the shape of this, and honestly, it feels like it's too nuanced. Like, what are the chances someone's actually going to need a blur in the shape of a clover, right? Unless you've purposely made your whole illustration about that particular clover, it makes it very difficult for me to believe that Photoshop, someone on their team decided like, oh, this is a user needed property. We have to include it or else we are failing them as the designers and the team, right? Like, I can't even tell what the difference is. So I don't even typically go into like the shape blur area, nor smart blurs, surface blur. They all seem the same to me in that aspect. Okay, it might be prudent for me to put something more obvious, like if I do an edge like this, and then you'll be able to see the iris blur happening. Iris blur. This is going to be super intensive on my computer, but basically iris blur works in that it's going to blur everything outside of this radius of the circle. And you shall see it once it's finished updating. So when you're doing this, make sure your computer is doing Photoshop on its own, unless you have a really, really strong computer, in which case props to you, and you can work multitasking, right? You can blur it some more. It seems my computer is stuck at 79%. So you can kind of see like the effect where it's starting to try to blur out everything else besides this circle. And so if you ever wanted to do some funny movie perspective tricks where maybe you're blurring the front person and then you're going to focus on, say, one point of your illustration, then this is where you would play around with it. You can mess around with the amount of grain, size of the grain. You can add color to it, just like how we had the add noise and stuff. Motion effects doesn't appear because we only see it for path blur, which allows you to draw a path. Oh, it finished. As I was talking about, say, if we don't do iris blur, field blur, it's just going to blur everything in general. Let's see if I press this, will it respond to anything? All right, tilt. Okay, tilt is just whether you want it, but basically you get to do these cool motion lines, right? So if I tilt it, it's going to make everything blur this way, and you can do the whole anime like do 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 kind of thing. Right? I can't do too much because it will kill my computer. So let's try a 16%. And then path blur is this thing where you get to draw a shape or a path. Right? You get to draw a path and then it'll blur along that path. I would just mess around with it. It's typically very helpful if you say you want to do more complex blurs, but I find that it's pretty easy usually to just use only basic Gaussian blur or motion blur and use the lasso tool pretty effectively, and then it'll get you the same result as if you had drawn your own path blur. But obviously if you want to like save yourself a couple of steps, just directly go here, draw yourself a path. See, it blurred in this direction. I mean, it behaves basically in the same way, right? I can draw another one and then it'll blur this area in this way. I can do it like that and then just end it, and then we can blur everything this way and then this way. And you see how it kind of blurs these things in that direction this way. And regardless, we're not going to mess around with those blurs anymore, but hopefully all those types of effects were helpful for when you want to spice up your own work, or like if you're trying to just work even faster. Here, like there's some ways to get around doing some shadows or like doing light. And I will see you in the next one where I will go over basically everything all together into one final illustration. I'll be pulling up some reference photos, trying to build a character, and then hopefully you get to join me in building that character and we'll finally get done with this stitch, right? Later!